So this might seem like one of the dumber ideas I've had on the channel. Ranking the first wave of every single Beyblade system on paper might just seem like a less interesting way to actually rate each system, but I actually think there's a lot of differences here that make it a lot different than that ranking would actually look. I think first impressions mean a lot. You could have a great start, and the line just can't really keep up with said start, and ends up feeling kind of disappointing, but you could also have a horrible start, and even if a line improves, it may still have quite a few detractors who just still don't believe in the line. So I thought it'd be fun to just sit here and make a ranking on the topic. Also, I'm not going to be ranking any subsystems, those are a lot different, so I opted to exclude them, though I will be counting the expand blade stuff, as it feels like kind of an evolution of each line, so that'll actually have 3 different entries. And as far as systems go that actually last 2 years, I'll be counting those as well. So the Hyperwheel system will have 2 entries for Metal Fight Season 1 and Metal Fight Explosion, and DB will also have 2 entries with DB and BU, but we'll talk more about that when we get to them. Anyway, let's go ahead and start. Number 24, CX. CX has arguably been the most divisive line we've ever had in Beyblade. Some people will defend it with their lives and refuse to admit that there's any faults with the system, and other people absolutely hate it and think that there's no redeeming qualities to CX at all. That said, even if you do like CX, it's hard to admit that the first wave was actually good at all. The bays look good, sure, but their center of gravity just made them far worse than any UX bays we already had. There were clearly faults just built into the system, and the part selection here from the first wave really doesn't help that at all. Ratchets and bits are fine, but for the blades, I mean, lock ships are cool, main blades, Brave is the best one, but as for assist blades, Slash was probably the best one, but it doesn't really pair well with Brave, so you just don't really have many good options from this first wave. It made a very bad first impression, and a lot of people were really excited to see CX when it was first announced, and upon release, it didn't really get a lot of hype compared to what a lot of people expected, because people immediately realized that there were some problems with the system. While yes, it has recovered to some extent, to this day I still don't think it's that great, but there are certainly viable parts that made it a lot better. But from that first wave, it was not looking too good. Number 23, the Synchrom system. You can make a good argument that this should be last place. Well yes, the Synchrom system is probably the worst system in Beyblade ever. From the first wave, I don't think it's quite that bad. Yeah, second worst, but not dead last. There was some interest with this. I mean, the idea of Synchrom putting 2 chrome wheels together, that was really cool at the time. Part selection was decent. I mean, W145, CF, those are kind of cool, though Sarmanda having reused parts kind of sucks. That said, you didn't have like the really overpowered synchroms quite yet, and while the idea was definitely concerning, it was still cool when it first came out, and also the whole zero-G concept of the stadium. Again, I think it was really just a gimmick, and a lot of people didn't like it, but again, from the first wave, I think it garnered some interest. Second wave, though, is probably a different story, but I think there was enough here to at least put it second to last instead of dead last. Definitely not a great system though. Number 22, the Chozy system. This was just boring. Part selection sucked, none of the discs had frames, which was just a baffling decision. Driver selection was okay, but the layers, I mean they had metal, sure, but we've had a couple bays with metal already. They didn't do anything, and this is coming off the season where we just had a bunch of god abilities on every single bay, so they just felt really, really bland. Again, having metal, it's like kinda cool, but that's all there's to say about it. It didn't feel interesting, especially coming off of such a good line with Beyblade vs. God. It feels like a step back in a lot of ways, but also a step forward in the most boring way possible as well. Having this much metal does kind of weight curve things, so it's not great. Definitely a very, very underwhelming line from the first wave. Number 21, the DB system from BU. The DB system already did a lot of crazy stuff, so seeing Divine Belial come out in BU wasn't really all that interesting. We did know we were getting a new gear set, so there was clearly some potential here, but as is, it was a pretty boring bay, but again, it's a year 2. Expectations were not as high, it was just more DB. And knowing that we were getting another gear set and just seeing how much the perfect gear set enhanced Dynamite Belial, we knew Divine Belial was probably going to be pretty crazy with the ultimate gear set, so not too much to worry about, but still doesn't really make this all that interesting of a first wave. Number 20, the Hard Metal system, also known as HMS. Also, for any lines that I don't have every single bay from, I'm just going to use images. But yeah, this started with Gaia Dragoon MS, Trigger MS, and Urseal MS. All of these bays were kind of bland, and this is coming off of the engine gear system, which was insane. Well yes, HMS does level up quite a bit once you get like the gimmick specialty stuff. As is, HMS just felt like a massive step back. Yeah, you had the metal now. It was interesting, kind of a soft reboot, but I feel like it was a hard sell. I still put it a little bit higher than some of these other ones because I think having metal here did at least add something new, and it was kind of cool. But going back to basics to this level was definitely underwhelming. Number 19, the Magnacore system. The Magnacore system is very similar to the Spin Gear system. Yeah, you have the Magnacore stuff, it's kind of cool, but the first wave didn't really do a whole lot here. You had Dragoon V, that's nice, but beyond that, there was Metal Dronzer, which had some new parts, but wasn't like a full-on Dronzer evolution or anything. And then from Korokoro, you also had Guardian Drugger, which technically I probably could have just skipped, but I decided to count it anyway. Again, had some new parts, but not really a new Drugger evolution or anything like that. I feel like the lineup's kind of the problem here. Having what is effectively probably a Spin Gear 2 system. Sounds like it could be higher on paper, but with Dragoon V being the only truly new feeling bay, it doesn't quite hit the mark that I would have hoped to see. Number 19, the hybrid wheel system, specifically the first season of it. I feel like the shift to clear wheels and metal wheels was pretty noteworthy. It made the bays look cooler. It didn't really harm them. Felt like a decent level up, so I didn't want to put it too low, but I also feel like the execution was pretty questionable. You got 3 of the 4 basic new metal wheels, Storm, Dark, and Rock, with those also giving their respective evolutions to older bays, Pegasus, Wolf, and Leon. The only basic type metal wheel we didn't have yet was, of course, for Stamina with Flame, which would come on the month after, but again, this is Wave 1, so we're not counting that. There was also Mad Cancer. On screen I have Dark Cancer, but it was this light wheel random booster. In here you also had all 4 light wheels just in here, Mad, Wind, Clay, and Heat, with of course Cancer being the new motif. My problem though is the part selection. We only had 1 new track here, which was from Mad Cancer, that being CH120. Having a mode-changing track though, going from 120 to 145 is pretty cool, but everything else being reused, I mean 105 and 145 being reused from the original versions of Pegasus and Leon's, underwhelming. And then Dark Wolf just straight up has TF145 FS, which is the combo Gemios had. Having your secondary starter of a new line just reusing the same combo as an older bay just feels bad. And speaking of, Mad Cancer also at FS. I don't know why they opted to use FS twice in the first wave, which is only 4 bays. At least the other 2 bottoms were new, Rock Leon having of course WB, which is decent, and Storm Pegasus having its iconic RF, and I think RF does a lot of work here, having your first ever rubber bottom. That's good. But overall, I don't think this line is all that, at least in Wave 1. Part selection just was not good enough here. Number 17, the God System. The God System did a great job turning everything around, because this first wave wasn't really all that good. Core discs and frames were a decent new idea, nothing great, but still a solid evolution. The driver selection was honestly pretty disappointing. Loop and Flugel just felt like retools of Defense and Survive. Yeah, you had the wheels or the blades, but still. Reboot was most interesting, being of course a mode-changing driver. And then there's the layers. All of them had gimmicks, but they weren't really all that dynamic. God Valkyrie had its bound gimmick, which was nice, but people would argue that it softened the blows, so is it that good? And then Christ Satan just had the 3 small rollers. Blaze Ragnarok had the 2 stamina wings. Not horrible, just kind of underwhelming overall. Some people thought God abilities wouldn't really make much of a difference at all. Obviously we know that it would turn around very quickly, and really is a fan favorite line nowadays, but at the start, it was not seen like this. I was there 9 years ago when this line came out, and opinions were definitely all over the place on this line. It's not bad, but with what they were going for, I could definitely see how this first wave was kind of underwhelming, and we'll have to turn things around greatly. Again, we're ranking the first waves here, and yet it wasn't the best. Number 16, the pre-heavy wheel system. We got Pegasus, Bull, Sagittario, and Leon, all perfectly fine starting bays for a new line. This gen of course went all in on the metal contact point idea, which is pretty cool. Beyond that though, these bays didn't do much. It's a start of a line, not much to really expect here. It was just okay. Number 15, the 4-layer system, the first ever Beyblade system. So we had 3 real bays here with Ultimate Dragoon, Saizo, and Frostic Dronzer, and then these 3 other bays which technically are unique motifs but just reused parts, with Gakiryuo, Meguro Arm, and Spark Knight. At least some extra options I guess. These bays were very, very underbaked, extremely basic. However, it is the first ever line, so that's perfectly fine. I figured just going one spot above the pre-hybrid wheel system was probably a solid spot for it. Technically you could argue this should be number 1, which is fair because it's the first ever Beyblade line. It introduced the entire concept of Beyblade, but I feel like that'd be really boring, so I decided to put it here. Number 14, the BX Expand system. This is a level up for BX, add some extra metal. Whether that actually ends up doing anything, who knows, but I think Drawn Strike is just a really good release. Doesn't feel all that crazy. I mean, it reuses 450, free flat's not really a new concept, but Drawn Strike is a pretty popular blade, people like it. It's a solid way to refresh BX, so I want to give it some credit, but it's not going to rank too highly on the list. Number 13, rounding out the bottom half of the list, CX Expand. This is a much, much better first wave for CX. It is still CX though, so I didn't want to put it top half. I figured the top of the bottom half of the list was probably a fair placement for it. Bahamut Blitz is a really cool release. Night Fortress is cool, like Ragnarok as well. Couple of ratchets here, of course. 150, great. 870. Finally getting 8-sided ratchets. Ignition and Yielding both feel like fairly unique bits. Block chips and assist blades are kind of just the same thing that we had before with CX, but main blades are now split into overblades and metal blades. Definitely does improve the aesthetics of the bay, but beyond that, is it really over impactful? I'm not sure, however. They are just better releases for CX in general, if nothing else, so it does a lot better in that regard. Again, still CX, so I don't want to put it too high, but as a big CX wave, it makes a much, much better impression. Number 12, now breaching into the top half of the list, the UX system. The UX system has some differences to BX, but it didn't feel way different either, at least at the time. They did introduce one set of ratchets, which is pretty cool. Also, the first ever 70 ratchets were here. That's nice. We had all new bits, Hexa being the most notable of them. And for the blades, Hell's Hammer was certainly one of the ways they could have evolved Hells, but still decent, I guess, at least in design. Drone Buster, great start to UX. And then there's Wizard Rod. Conceptually, it's just kind of what you want from a sound type, but obviously competitively, this thing is an absolute nightmare. I think UX makes a pretty good first impression. Nothing crazy, but it did come out only a few months into Beyblade X, so I don't want to be too harsh on it. I think it does its job as a solid early refresh for Beyblade X. Number 11, the Super King system. This made a pretty decent first impression. I mean, you had two protagonists here with Super Hyperion and King Helios. Also, Ragnarok finally returns as Glider Ragnarok. And of course, the big thing here was the chassis system. Glider Ragnarok just uses the single chassis, making a fairly traditional layer just in a new style, having the wheel disc, which is what you'd expect from a disc. However, Super Hyperion and King Helios had double chassis, one attack and one balance respectively, which fused that extra part of the layer with the disc, which is pretty crazy. Felt very unique. Was definitely an unexpected way to take Beyblade Burst, and because of that, I think it was pretty noteworthy. It's nothing too crazy. I don't think this line was something that came out to like a ton of fanfare or anything, but it was still a pretty solid first wave for a new system. Number 10, the engine gear system. The engine gear system is absolutely insane. The reason it's this low though is because the only bay that came out was Dragoon G. While Dragoon G was a great example of what the engine gear system was, I feel like you really needed some other bays to give some other release type of examples to really start this line effectively. As is though, it's still good. Again, Dragoon G does enough here to at least warrant being in the top 10, but on its own, I think that's really all it could do. Number 9, the spin gear system. In my opinion, the best introduced line in Bogdan Shoot. Bogdan Shoot did like to be a little bit weird, either introducing bays that just had a lot of reused parts, or maybe had new parts but weren't really unique motifs, or just didn't have many bays at all. The spin gear system did go with Dragoon S and Drugger S, Drugger S being the first ever Drugger, and Dragoon S being the first ever left spin bay. You also had things like Death Trigger, Night Dronzer, and Metal Seal, which were nice, but I think the main attention here is going to be on Dragoon S being the first ever left spin bay. I also just think that the spin gear system does a great job evolving the very, very basic layout of the 4-layer system into something much better. Also, of course, introducing a new spin direction is great, so 9th feels fair. Number 8, the GT system. This is a weird one. In terms of drivers, you had a pretty decent selection. Discs were also pretty good. We finally moved off core discs, which was nice. We had core discs and frames for 2 years, so seeing genuinely new discs was great. And they even had small gimmicks. Sting being bound, Blitz having its flaps, and Hurricane having the free spinning outer plastic piece. The main event though would be the layers and the fact that they are now divided. I think Ace Dragon did a great job coming with both Rock and Grand to really show off the modular layer system, but you also had Slash Valkyrie and Bush and Ashura there as well, which is nice. Again, just having divided layers nearly 4 years in a Beyblade Burst was just good to see. Opened the door for more customization, and after Chosets, which felt like a bit of a down year, had a fair amount of hype going into it, so I think GT does a good job at introducing a new Beyblade line and generating a fair bit of hype. Number 7, the DB system. The DB system only has 2 bays, however they're both pretty good bays with Dynamite Belial and Cyclone Ragnarok. Right away, we had high and low mode just baked into the system itself. That's nice. We also had DB discs, and that was really important because before this, like, Sparking still used core discs and frames at times, which is like the 4th year straight that they made appearances. And the GT style discs were still being used in Sparking as well for a 2nd year in a row. So getting DB discs, a fully new style of disc, was just really welcome. Driver selection was decent. The Super King system was pretty good, but felt kind of clunky. GT system also felt clunky at times, but I think the DB system really nailed the modular layer system. Cyclone even had a gimmick, which we didn't really see many gimmicks in first waves and a lot of burst lines, so that was nice. And we also knew that Dynamite Belial was actually going to be getting some kind of upgrade pieces, which really adds to this bay being very basic, and we knew that over time it'd become crazier, so definitely some potential there. And overall, it just felt like a really good introduction to DB. Number 6, the Hyper Wheel system from Metal Fight Explosion. What a great refresh of a line. I feel like Season 1 was kind of underwhelming. Didn't really evolve as much as I would have hoped, but with Metal Fight Explosion, they opted to keep the Hyper Wheel system to really develop it further, and they came out with a great first line for this 2nd year. Galaxy Pegasus alone was just a very, very striking bay. Faces were now tattooed, though unfortunately my pass-up did use stickers, but still, they were tattooed on. Clear wheels now had some extra design elements on them. Galaxy was painted, which was just cool. We had W105, the first short track like this to not just be a basic track, and then R2F, a more chaotic RF that's pretty noteworthy. Ray Unicorno also was a pretty solid first wave bay, having a unique metal wheel. It does reuse the 125, but you also get CS, and I don't think people knew how good CS would be when it first came out, but it became a very important part. Still a unique part for sure, so another good thing about this wave. And then you also had Mercury Anubis. Kind of weird release being part of the Beta 1 machine, but technically does release at the same time as these two. Again, Mercury Anubis being a great looking bay, having a painted metal wheel. It also gave us 85 and XF, XF being the most chaotic plastic flat we had, and 85 being the shortest track that we had. So overall, great wave. Great refresh of the Hyperwheel system for sure. Number 5, the single layer system. If I had to rank the bays of every first wave of every generation, I think Burst did the best. Valkyrie, Spriggan, Ragnarok, Corbius. Really nice bays, really clean. In my opinion, the best introduction in a generation. However, it wouldn't be this high without the burst mechanic. While bursting is a cool concept, another way to win, I really can't overstate just how noteworthy and crazy it was at the time. Like, the burst mechanic when it first came out was insane. Always exciting to see a burst. A lot more common back then too. And really the burst mechanic is why I have the burst system so high up. It was a great thing to introduce to the Beyblade series. Number 4, the BX system. You had Drawn Sword, Hell Scythe, Wizard Arrow, and Night Shield to introduce each type for Beyblade X. They're all just kind of fine. Drawn's Rest also here is a remake for some reason. I really do think this is the least interesting start to any generation, at least in terms of the bays. However, the reasons why it's so high is of course the Extreme line. Seeing Extreme Dashes for the first time was absolutely insane, and is why this line was just so wild and got a lot of people interested. Seeing bays this chaotic was just inherently a cool thing. No doubt. So even though I'm not huge on the BX system personally, and I think the bays are fairly uninteresting here, that alone puts it this high up. I don't want to put too much higher. I think the other 3 lines above it deserve it, but this is still a great one. Number 3, the dual layer system. I mean, this is just a perfect evolution to the single layer system. Victor, Valkyrie, Storm, Spriggan, Rising, Ragnarok, Kaiser, Corbius. They're all just good. Good new layers, great way to evolve the original versions of these layers. Had all new discs, all new drivers, and these drivers were pretty cool. Press probably being the least interesting, but still, I like the spike design on it. Revolve having a free spinning plate to unite, having the rubber coating around it, and of course, Variable being a rubber driver with the different spikes that had the awakening gimmick. Just a great evolution of Beyblade Burst overall. Really, really strong. Probably the most consistent of any of these lines. Number 2, UX Expand. Bullet Griffin is just wild. Obviously having ratchet integrated bits is already pretty noteworthy, but it gives genuinely unique gimmicks much more room to actually function, and they really made use of that with Bullet Griffin. This base splits into 2. That's just insane. And while I have to not count the gimmick specialty line, if I did count it, it'd be one spot below this because, well, Box and Shoot definitely had a much higher ceiling than Beyblade X at this point, with HMS really stripping it back, and Phantom Foxmas being the introductory bay was insane. But again, the ceiling of Box and Shoot was already so high that, well, yes, it was an insane bay, I don't think it was as shocking as Bullet Griffin is in UX, so I'd give Bullet Griffin the spot over it. But yeah, a bay that splits in half in this generation that really had pretty stripped back gimmicks is just wild. The main downside here is that I don't know if they could really top this or even match this again. That's going to be difficult. But as is, it's a crazy way to start. Number 1, the 4D system. This is just the best way to ever introduce a line. No question. Best first wave we've ever gotten. We had the Hyperwheel system for 2 years. It became much better over time, but still wasn't anything that crazy compared to the rest of the Beyblade. But the 4D system really upped that, and Big Bang Pegasus was a great first starting bay for that. I mean, you got a good sampling of how metal wheels could be now, with Big Bang having, of course, the core metal frame and PC frame, and we also got our first ever 4D drive with Final Drive. Again, it's a crazy bay for the time, way more dynamic than anything up until this point, just a great start. However, unlike with UX Expand, it doesn't raise questions to if other bays could match it, because we also got Fang Leon. I think Fang Leon coming out with Big Bang Pegasus is very important here, because it does help to temper expectations. Yeah, Big Bang is crazy, but Fang Leon shows that not every metal wheel is going to be 3 parts. Fang just being the core and a metal frame, there's no PC frame. Big Bang's all about having different orientation gimmicks, having of course 4 different modes. Fang has 2 modes, but it is used with flipping the metal frame, so rather than shifting orientations, it's a flip gimmick. Pretty good way to show another style of mode change. And also we had 130W2D. Again, confirming that tracks and bottoms still will be around, and 4D drives are not taking over. 130 is pretty good. Up until this point it had only been on random booster bays or just kind of random set bays. Had never been on a proper mainline bay, so here it is. And then W2D, new bottom, cool. 4D just does a great job evolving Metal Fight in general, but I think this first wave shows how far they can go, but also does give us another bay to help temper expectations. Not every bay is going to be Big Bang level, but you're still going to get some good bays, just in maybe a bit of a different style. So they did a great job there. So there you have it, my ranking of every Beyblade system's first wave. Hopefully the video made enough sense. Again, it's kind of a dumb idea, but also just a topic that I kind of wanted to do anyway, so here it is. I think I've already said everything I wanted to say though, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.